Yeah, like you were just saying, like you would have friends that don't know how to respect your boundaries or um, stuff like that, or just, weren't necessarily like great friends and stuff like that in general. And I've definitely had my share of those experiences as well. And I would say, like, as I've gotten older, I'm definitely a lot more selective now, which I think is probably another thing that kind of makes this whole process a little more difficult. Because I think in college, like you're just like looking like to have people to like do stuff with, because there's always something to do. So it's like, oh, like study together, go out together, eat together, like all of that. And like I wouldn't say I was necessarily very selective in my like
Mm.
choosing of people. Like it was kind of like, okay, like people like if they're nice to me and I'm nice to them and it's like, okay, we're kind of like similar in whatever way, like I would just be friends with them. It wasn't really like, okay, like are they honest? Are they good? Like is their character, like what is their character or whatever. Like I really wouldn't think about any of those things before I befriended them. And now I feel like I don't know, I'm a lot more selective and it's kind of a turn off for me. Like if you're, if you say something or whatever and it doesn't really I'm not like closed-minded, I would say, but I would say like I'm very selective. So it's like yes, I've encountered like hundreds of people since I've graduated college, but it's like I just I'm so selective that it's like very few of them are people that I would even want to be friends with. So I think that definitely makes it a lot more difficult, for sure.
Okay, so that's an interesting point you made, but it's really relatable. I feel like in high school and in college, you're surrounded by so many people. There's so much stuff to do. So, of course, you want to do that stuff and you need people. And so now that you're more selective, I guess I want to ask you, are you lonely? And do you think your selectivity increases your loneliness? Or maybe did you feel lonely despite having all of those people around you back in college? I'm curious about your experiences.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd say I have a very interesting relationship with the feeling of loneliness. Um, like I remember like in high school at least, like up until yeah, like high school, college time, I would have like a feeling of like disconnectedness from other people that I think made me feel very, very lonely. For what one reason or another, like even if I had like friends or acquaintances that were in my life, like I would still have that kind of like underlying sense of loneliness, that I kind of just grew up with, and I just remember having it for like the longest time. And I would say in my later young adult life and more recently, I honestly haven't experienced it that much. Even if I do still spend most of my time alone, I would say I don't feel that same sense of loneliness as much as I used to. I'm not sure exactly why. I think in general, I am a more like a well-adjusted person now, and I do think maybe I also just feel like a greater sense of like connectedness to people, and that's probably why I do not feel that way anymore. But I would say, yeah, like with selectivity, there will be times where it's like, oh, like I wish I had more people in my life to like talk to or hang out with or something, right? Or I'll just have that kind of feeling. And it can kind of manifest in a sense of like loneliness, I would say. I do still have moments where I experience that. Um, and I would say, yeah, I would guess being selective does make it harder for sure. But I also know, like, you know, lowering my standards isn't necessarily going to solve the problem for me because I wouldn't be happy with spending time with someone who I don't think meets my standards. So, like you said earlier, like it's not necessarily like a waste of time, but I would just kind of feel like I'm wasting time. So, um, I wouldn't enjoy it. It kind of would be like a empty, like meaningless interaction, and I wouldn't really gain anything from it. So it's like, I don't know, I don't feel very motivated to engage in situations like that. So yeah, I would say selectivity definitely makes it harder, but at the same time, it's kind of like, I don't really see a solution to that because I just know that even whether it's with like friendships or dating or whatever, I myself know like I wouldn't be completely happy settling for anything less. So there's just like that's not really an option in my mind. So I feel like I'll just probably just stay selective because I just feel like that's what comes naturally to me. So, you know.
Yeah, I mean, again, I keep saying I completely agree, but I completely agree. I remember even when I was a kid, if I go back there, I always had such a difficult time with social interactions. And I remember
Hmm.
when I was in second grade, probably up until middle school. But specifically, I remember in second grade, we'd go outside for recess. I would just sit and I would just cry and like have a little meltdown because I don't know, just everything was so overwhelming. And I get older, I try to be more adjusted, and I think now I'm a well adjusted individual. Being in large groups doesn't make me cry. But I do have to say, I do have a preference to not be in large
Hmm.
groups. I definitely
Hmm.
prefer being one on one. But
Hmm.
saying that, throughout middle school and high school, most definitely, I felt very, very lonely. And
Hmm.
I wouldn't say I was necessarily, sure, I was a little weird, but like I had
Hmm.
friends.
Hmm.
I was able to fit in relatively okay. Even in college, when I made quite a bit of friends, I think that I just felt very misunderstood, as they say, and I
Hmm.
didn't feel like I had a real connection with really the majority of my friends.
Hmm.
And so I would say now, despite being post college in a different state and a different city, I
Hmm.
have far better coping mechanisms and far better coping skills. And I said that I naturally kind of prefer like solitude. So loneliness doesn't, in itself, I guess I would say solitude. I appreciate solitude, but I definitely do feel isolated. I feel,
Hmm.
I mean, I'm pretty physically isolated from people
Hmm.
considering. Again, I moved to a different city specifically for my job, but again, it's pretty remote. And when I do go into the office, I enjoy being around people. And then I actually like cherish going to Trader Joe's, and I
Hmm.
make an effort to take out my headphones, talk to the cashiers, and
Hmm.
I actually means like a lot to me. But in general,
Hmm.
I would say I don't, like the loneliness doesn't kill me, but the isolation, I feel quite isolated and I don't like feeling isolated.